Hi, my name is Jason Clark and I'm here at South Dakota State University, and today we're going to go over how to use the soil fertility equations workbook and determine nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and sulfur rate guidelines for corn, soybean, and wheat in South Dakota crops. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to open our workbook, and once we open it we're going to see this on here. As you can see on this page, we have 7 different tabs on the bottom right here. We have, starting over here, our first 4 tabs are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium recommendations, starting with corn grain, corn silage, soybean, wheat, and rye. And then our next one is our sulfur fertilizer recommendations, which is for all crops. Our next tab or worksheet is one that has legume credits in it to remind us what they are, as well as a calculator to change parts per million in your soil test to pounds per acre that we need to use in our fertility recommendations. So first of all, we're going to go over the corn grain nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium worksheet. Then we'll quickly go through the other ones because they're very similar. So first of all, we'll see here as we pull it up, this area here, we have the instructions. Generally, the cells that are yellow require us to input information. Those cells that are gray or white are those that are informational, or there's a calculation, so we won't do anything there. So step 1 is we need to choose the multiplier for the corn nitrogen per bushel of grain multiplier. So recent research has shown that that value used to be 1.2, however now we've moved to 1.0. However, in some eastern parts of the state, 0.9 is also very accurate. So if we want to look at changing that, we can click on this 1.0 cell right here, and we could use this drop-down list to choose 1.0, 0.9, or 0.8. The default will be 1.0 as that's shown to be the most accurate. But also in some parts of eastern South Dakota, 0.9 is also accurate. So you can kind of see, if you play with that number a little bit, what might be changing as far as your rate recommendation goes. So we're going to leave this at 1.0. Then we're going to jump down to step 2 right here. This is going to be our soil test phosphorus. We have 2 phosphorus tests that you can get from lab reports that are common in South Dakota that we have recommendations for. The first one is Olsen phosphorus, and the second one is Bray phosphorus. Olsen phosphorus works well on high pH soils and low pH soils. Bray works best on lower pH soils below 7.4. So if we have our Olsen phosphorus, we can leave this here. However, if we have our Bray, we can click on that cell, use that drop down, and switch to Bray. This is important because the information that we use in the chart below us will need to be the same as what's here, or else the recommendation won't show. So we're going to show it switch it back to Olsen. We're going to use that. We're going to go to step 3 right here, and this is going to show us each of the different columns in this data input right here. So our first thing is our field ID, and I just have an example here of putting Brookings 1. Our next thing we're going to do right here is our yield goal, and we have information for each of these right here that you can read on your own. But our yield goal here, and this is our yield potential for the field. We're going to say it's 160 of this field. Our soil test nitrogen, that 0 to 24 inch value, goes in our next column. We're going to use a value of 40 right here. And then our legume credit, we're going to say our previous crop was soybean. We also have this calculator down here, this legume credit chart. If you want to look at it, if your previous crop was soybean or alfalfa or things like that, you can look at here and see what that number might be. This no-till nitrogen adjustment, if our no-till is within about 5 years, we can add about 30 pounds of this credit by clicking on there. However, if we're no-till long time, we can probably leave it at 0. If we're conventional till, we also would leave it at 0. Now this next one is Olsen phosphorus. If we did an Olsen phosphorus test, then we would put a value in here. However, if we did a Bray phosphorus test, we put it in the next column right here. So here we're using an Olsen phosphorus test. And then we're going to leave the Bray phosphorus test blank. And then our next one is potassium. So here we say our potassium is 233. And then after we put that information in over here, we can see that our nitrogen recommendations come up here as 80 pounds of nitrogen per acre. Our phosphorus is 6, and our potassium at 0. So let's say we actually took the Bray phosphorus test instead. We can switch this number, say it was about 12 parts per million Bray phosphorus. We'd go back up here to step 2 and we'd switch this to Bray phosphorus. Then go back down here, we can see that since we switched that Bray phosphorus to here, we now get a recommendation, and our recommendation now is 45 based on this Bray test. And say our potassium recommendation came back to 233, it was only about 140. And then our potassium recommendation comes up about 60 pounds of potassium per acre. So you can add in different fields all the way going down this column here until we run out. Below here, this is a link to the fertilizer recommendation guide to where these numbers come from. These are the equations used in the workbook that we're using right now. These are the soil test calibration levels. The probability we'll see a response based on the soil test here. And then this is the chance we're going to see a response based on what category we're in. Say Bray phosphorus 0 to 5 is 80% chance response, 6 to 10 is 60 to 80% chance response, 11 to 15 is 40 to 60% chance we'll see a response, 16 to 20 is a 20 to 40% chance we'll see a response, and above 21 there's less than 20% chance we'll see a response. So normally we wouldn't advise to apply fertilizer at this point when we're at that level of phosphorus fertilizer. So this here is what we use to get those recommendations for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium for corn. If we're using corn silage, it's very similar. The only difference is you notice we won't be choosing a multiplier up here. That's because there's not options for it. It's just a single option, so that's just in the recommendation itself. But you can also go through here, choose the Olsen phosphorus test, and then use step 2 to choose these various components right here and input them into the data sheet right here, and we can get our recommendations for corn grain silage. The wheat and rye is exactly like this one. We choose our Olsen test. We put in the rest of our parameters down in here, and we have examples here of what some different ones might be in their recommendations. Soybean is a little different, as soybean doesn't require nitrogen. So we just have a step for phosphorus, and then yield goal, phosphorus, and then potassium. And our nitrogen recommendation is always going to be 0 right here. But we'll get back phosphorus and potassium recommendations based on our soil test levels. The all crops for sulfur recommendation is this right here, and that has a couple different steps. Step 1 is we need our soil texture, then our tillage practice, and then our soil test sulfur down to 24 inches. And that 24 inches is important because 0 to 6 is not a very usable number, but 0 to 24 has been shown to work much better. So here we're going to put our field ID. We're going to click on soil texture, and we have a drop down. We can choose between a coarse soil, which is higher sands, medium fine texture soil, which is more of your loamy, clay loam textures. And then we're going to choose our tillage practice, which is going to be a conventional till, or choose strip till or no till. And then we're going to input our soil test sulfur value. Say here it was 15 pounds sulfur per acre, and that comes back with a recommendation of 25. Our next worksheet here is our legume credit and our parts per million to pounds per acre calculator. So we'll start up here, and again, these are the instructions. You can see here we input in yellow cells, get information back in gray cells. So here we're going to put the beginning depth. So say we're doing our topsoil starting at 0, we're going down to 6. We get our soil test sulfur value of 9. We show that changes to 18 pounds per acre. Then we do another test from 6 inches to 24 inches in depth. We get a value of 4. That calculates out to 24 pounds per acre. Let's say we go even deeper at this site. We go 24 to 36. Another soil test value of 4, 16 pounds per acre. And then here, if we have all the same depth, we can use that to total up at 58 pounds per acre. And then we can use that number to go back here and put it into our sulfur value right here. Say that was 58, say that was actual. We'd see our sulfur recommendation was 0 in this case. However, if we're just doing nitrogen, then we're at 0 to 6 and 6 to 24, these same values, we see 42. We can go back to our corn grain. Instead of using that 40, we can say it was 42. You can see it adjusts over here for what that should be. Our next one is our legume nitrogen credits. So this is here, we look at our previous crop. With soybean, edible beans, lentils, or others, we have nitrogen credit of 40. If it's alfalfa or a green legume, you can see based on the plants per square foot, we get the nitrogen credits here that would then go in the columns here for nitrogen credits. We can type them in 40. If it's maybe after a good alfalfa crop, this would be such as 150. And you can see your recommendation when you do that actually goes down to 0, which is pretty common. We've seen that in Minnesota and out in the West as well, where if you have a good alfalfa crop going into corn, you don't very often need nitrogen to supplement. Our last worksheet is our equations. This is the equations for all of the crops that you can see here, our nitrogen recommendations, our phosphorus recommendations, using the Olsen test, and then our potassium recommendations. So these are what are used. So I really hope that this helps you kind of understand how we can use these different calculators to help input that information and then get back these nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium rates, as well as sulfur, using our other spreadsheet. And I hope this information is valuable to you and your operation and can hopefully make your life easier. Thank you for your time today.